Hello Vault Heads, this is the self-proclaimed, sarcastically named Captain KeyForge, also known as PJ Broughton of the Steel City Snufflegators. And welcome to this episode of Captain's Commpod. So today we are going to talk about the Tide cards. We're going to talk about what, in my opinion, is the best card that interacts with the Tide from each house, obviously in the set Dark Tidings, because that's all we have at the moment, but for anyone listening in future. Okay, so this was recorded when there was only Dark Tidings. Okay, I'm going to go from worst to best, so here we go. Okay, so the first one is House Sanctum Dry the River. Artifact, no Amber Pip. Each creature gains while the tide is low. This creature cannot reap. Okay, so yes, it's a reciprocal effect, and yes, it can start a chain war, which is one of the reasons why I like it. Cards that can start a chain war in this set are one of the few ways to actually make the good decks from the older sets eat the chains. I've played quite a few games with my better decks from Worlds Collide and Kota and stuff against some of my better decks from Dark Tidings, and there are very few occasions where I need to actually bother raising the tide. It can be quite anonymous for a strong deck from Kota or Worlds Collide, as I'm sure a lot of you have already noticed. So something like this that says, if I raise a tide and you don't, you cannot reap with a single one of your creatures, is very strong. It's not broken and it's not game breaking. It's not quite up there with the likes of your Quixelstones and the Heart of the Forest, but if they want to reap, and they've got 5 ready creatures, and 5 Amber's going to put them in check they're going to have to take the 3 chains. So I really like it for that. If you are raising the tide, your opponent can't reap. And equally as well, if you're playing against older sets, they're not going to have cards that raise the tide. They're going to have to just take the chains to get the tide high to be able to reap with the creatures. Probably not quite as good Dark Tidings against Dark Tidings, because most decks in Dark Tidings have got some way of raising the tide. I think it's written into the algorithm that every deck has to have at least one card that raises the tide, but it is still strong. And to just go, right, you can't reap now unless you take 3 chains, is a very good artifact, and I like it a lot, so that's why it's there. But I think the other cards that I'm going to start talking about in a minute are better. Okay, so now we'll go on to the next one. This is my choice for logos. It is a creature, no Amber Pip again, power 2, no armor, PI Sweven. Okay, and this one says reap. If the tide is high, draw 3 cards. Familiar listeners will know that I don't value draw as much as I value other things. That is true, but 3 cards, well, statistically, 1 in every 3 cards in your deck is house logos, so you ought to be able to play a card off the back of that. Equally, if you've had to take 3 chains to raise the tide to trigger this effect, well, 3 chains are only really worth 3 cards anyway. So if you raise the tide and just got this effect off it, you haven't exactly hurt yourself long term, because you've exchanged 3 cards for 3 cards. And if you raise the tide, do this and do anything else that requires you to have the tide high, or if you've got anything passive that helps with the tide being high, it's very good. I think it's slightly better than the last one, because the last one can affect you and can hurt you. Because obviously if your opponent raises the tide and the tide is low for you, you've got to either raise the tide or you've got to pay the chains to be able to reap with your creatures. So because this only benefits you, your deck, the person who's using it, I think it's better than the other one. But some of the other ones coming up, I think those are better. But yes, a creature that can reap and draw 3 cards is not a bad little creature to have. And obviously as well, if you can get it in a deck with the Rooftop Laboratory and the 4 cards set that and it will come down ready. Or if you're playing against a Speed Sigil from Kota, if you can get it down ready, that's even better. But that is my choice for house logos. So the next one is from House Shadows. Okay, it is a creature. It is an evil twin. creature. Now I've said it's an evil twin creature, you may well have guessed that it is power 1, no armour, evil twin sea urchin. Creature, play, capture 2. If the tide is high, steal 2. Let's be honest, no one's ever complained about having Ronnie Wristlocks in their deck, have they? You know, and Ronnie Wristlocks, your opponent had to have 7 for Ronnie Wristlocks to steal 2. This just steals 2, as long as your opponent's got them. I mean, again, the tide has to be high for it to do the stealing. But again, the capture 2 is not bad. Capture 2 in the right circumstance can be pretty good. You know, you think about something like Primus Unguis, which is in this set, you know, plus power across the board for every armour on it. So capture is alright, but steal is better. And yeah, for me, a creature that's just got playability, steal 2, it's a pretty good creature. I mean, there's not a lot special about it, to be fair. You know, it doesn't have any ability like poison or anything like that, so once it's down, it's not going to do a lot. But I'll say this, once it's down, if you've got any type of recursion in your deck, if you've got Witch of the Dawns, which can pull creatures out your discard and stuff like that, if you've got Safe or Sorry, which can archive creatures from play, which is in House Shadows, if I was looking at this on the board, I don't want to kill it. I want to leave it there. I don't want you to get it off the board and play it again. So because your opponent doesn't necessarily want to kill it, doesn't want to get it off the board and let you play it again, you might actually get some value reaping out of it. But yeah, that is my choice for Shadows. Sea Urchin, steal 2 if the tide is high. So next one, I've gone for Saurians. And I have gone for a creature, no Amber Pip, power 5, 0 armour, Medicus Lacus. While the tide is high, you may spend Amber on friendly creatures as if it were in your pool. Obviously, we've heard that before. Senator Brachus is very similar, except the tide doesn't have to be high for Senator Brachus. But how good is Senator Brachus? Aren't we glad he's not a common card? I mean, Senator Strix is pretty good, spending Amber that's just on that one creature, as is the Killer Pigeon Ideal, which allows you to spend Amber on creature once you put that upgrade onto it. So yes, this chap, or chapess, who, you know, any Amber that's on your board, you can spend it as if it was in your pool. It is very good. Also as well, like the Sanctum card earlier, it's one of the few cards in the set that can create a tug of war over the chains. Again, if you've got 6 Amber spread across your creatures, and your opponent hasn't got a card to kill this creature, or it's got a taunt creature at the side of it, or it's warded, or both, and they can't get it off, well, they can take the tide, and that stops it from working. And I've played games with this card, I can't remember whether it was mine or my opponent's, to be honest, where turn after turn after turn, I'll take the tide to stop you spending that 6 Amber that's across your board, because I can't kill it. I'll take the tide back to allow me to spend it unless you can kill it this turn. Well, I'll take it, and literally tide every single turn. One person's taking the tide, and the chains got quite silly in that game. But anything that has got a really powerful effect based on the tide, and that can force your opponent to have to take it because it's a passive ability sitting there, is quite strong. So I've gone for that one for House Saurian. Okay, so now we'll move on to the next one, and for this one I've gone for Star Alliance. Okay, once again I've gone for a creature, so we've got no Amber Pip, most of them don't. We have got power 3, no armour, we've got Lieutenant Valmart, or Valmar possibly, don't know whether he's a little bit more French or a little bit more English speaking with his name. But the tide on this one is Play, Fight, Reap. If the tide is high, keys cost +3 during your opponent's next turn. So you must raise the tide before you play him, because if you play him and the tide is low, the play effect doesn't trigger. Tip for you. But it's quite strong. Something that increases your opponent's key cost by 3 is pretty strong. Now, admittedly, you have to either play it or use it. It was a bit like Retagalim. where you had to play it and exalt it, or you had to read with it and exalt it. You do have to use it to make this trigger. So, I mean, like I say, the tide has to be high when you play it, but if the tide's high when you play it, easy. Right, now your opponent's cost +3 next turn. If you fight with it, if you fight into something elusive, there we go, yeah. I mean, you'd probably reap over fighting into something elusive unless you needed to get rid of something elusive, but if you're trying to get rid of something elusive, this is a great little bonus to get off the back of fighting into an elusive creature. The only reason that the card that's coming after it is further down the list, because I think it's better, is because, again, you have to use this. If you don't go into Star Alliance, or if you haven't got a way to house cheat and use Star Alliance, you can't increase the key cost on the next turn. But yes, I do think that a key cost increase of +3 is pretty strong. Equally, as a playability is pretty nice too, so that's why we've got Star Alliance there. So next up we have House Unfathomable, the new one. Okay, and again we've gone for a creature. It seems quite creature heavy, as you can tell. It's got no Amber Pip, it's got no armor, it is power 4, and it is Portal Monger. While the tide is high, your opponent's keys cost +4. Okay, so obviously better than Lieutenant Valmar. Lieutenant Valmar is cost +3, this guy's cost +4. This one as well, it's just permanent and passive, so when you play it, it's in effect. When it's on the board and you haven't fought or reaped with it, it's in effect. It's a passive ability. While ever it's down, the keys cost +4, they have to kill it. Or they have to swallow the chains off the tide. Because again, if they swallow the chains off the tide, they'll obviously take it away. So another card that can turn the whole tide thing into a tug of war, because if they haven't got a way to kill it and they need that key cost to come back down to put them in check to either win the game or forge the keys, catch up, whatever, that's a big incentive to take the 3 chains to raise the tide and reduce your key cost by 4. Equally as well, while ever this guy is down, you have got a very good chance of being able to take them off check, because just raise the tide. Just raise the tide. You know what I mean? Use one of the cards that's raise the tide, or take the 3 chains. Again, the Quarter decks and Worlds Collide decks that are really strong, that don't need to be worried about the tide, this is one of the cards that will make them worried about the tide. This is one of the cards that they'll either have to deal with, or they'll have to swallow the chains and take the tide. This is one of them. And yeah, like I say, passive ability, key cost of +4. I just think it's very, very strong. I would never be disappointed seeing this in my Unfathomable house if I pulled a Dark Tidings deck. So now we'll go on to the last one, which is what I think is the strongest. It's obviously House Untamed, because it's all we've got left. It's a creature again. It's power 2, no armor. It's also elusive, and it is Chelonia. After you play another creature, if the tide is high, gain 1 amber. So obviously Hunting Witch, but based on the tide being high. Plus as well, another reason why I've got this higher up than the rest of them, you can take the tide just to use it. So your opponents can turn off the Portal Monger, for instance. You can turn this off, but I can just turn it back on again and get the multiple amber out of it. Or I can even just put it down and forget about the tide, and if you manage to kill it before I play any creatures, fine. But if you don't manage to remove it with its elusive before I play any creatures, I will raise the tide just to get a nice big burst of amber. Again, it's a passive ability, so I don't need to reap with it, I don't need to have played it or actioned it, I don't need to call Untamed. It is what Untamed do very well, and what they've always done very well: find ways to gain lots of amber quickly, get into check, rush away with the game. And it's a good addition to House Untamed, but also quite a good addition to Dark Tidings, and also the whole tide mechanic, because of the tide must be high for its ability to trigger. So that's something I'm finding a lot with Dark Tidings, that you'll find there's a card that's an exact copy of a previous card, but based on with the tide being high, like Medicus Lacus is Senator Brachus with a tide high, and this is Hunting Witch with a tide high. So yeah, that is what I've gone for House Untamed. I have gone for Chelonia, so that is my list. Next week, what we'll do, we'll have a list of the cards which I think are the worst cards that interact with the tide from each house within the set of Dark Tidings. So obviously listen out for that one. As ever, I'd love to hear where you think I've gone wrong, where you think I'm right, where you disagree, why you disagree, where you agree and why you agree. You can comment, you can email, you can contact me on Facebook or Twitter, you can subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast. You can like the video. If you'd like to support me in doing more deck openings and producing some custom tokens and things like that, you can do that via Patreon. I very much thank you for staying with me all the way through to the end of another Captain's Commpod. I hope that you join me again soon, and as ever, may the Forge be with you.